at the scene in Cordova. Our crews have seen FBI and TBI agents going in and out of that house. The Shelby County Assessor's website lists this house as being owned by Lontrell Williams. That is the name of both Pooh Shiesty and his father. The rap star is in a halfway house right now after being released from federal.
Breaking news just shook the hip-hop world. And if you think this is just another rumor, you might want to pay close attention. Pooh Shiesty, one of the fastest rising artists to come out of Memphis, is suddenly back in the spotlight, but not for music this time. We're talking about federal agents, early morning chaos, and a situation that's raising more questions than answers. And here's the part that makes this even more intense. His name is once again being tied to serious allegations, with whispers involving none other than Gucci Mane. Now, before you jump to conclusions, understand this. When federal authorities show up, it's never random. Every move is calculated, every step documented, and every person connected becomes part of a much bigger picture. What happened at that Tennessee property isn't just another headline. It could change everything for Pooh Shiesty's future. Was this about him directly, or is there something deeper going on behind the scenes? Because the truth is, in the federal system, your past doesn't stay in the past, and sometimes it comes back when you're closest to freedom. The story of Pooh Shiesty isn't just another rap success story. It's one of the fastest rises mixed with one of the most complicated falls the industry has seen in years. Coming straight out of Memphis, he didn't just enter the game, he exploded into it. Within a short time, his name was everywhere, his sound was dominating playlists, and his presence was impossible to ignore. And a big part of that early momentum came when he linked up with Gucci Mane, a veteran in the game known for spotting raw talent before the rest of the world catches on.
Up in that like I join side. Nigga, please. They got $1 million. Broke ass nigga. Making heart hurt, boy. They don't make these niggas happy. These niggas ain't happy on home. Step to me, nigga. I would love to, nigga. I don't care. You see me, my wife, you can step to me. I'ma smoke you.
When Gucci Mane brought him into 1017 Records, it wasn't just a co-sign, it was a launch pad. Suddenly, Pooh Shiesty wasn't just a local name anymore. He was a national conversation. Tracks started gaining traction, fans started locking in, and the streets backed his authenticity. Everything about his rise felt fast, almost too fast. And when that kind of momentum builds, it usually comes with pressure and attention. But here's the thing about attention. It doesn't only come from fans and the music industry. Sometimes it comes from people watching for very different reasons. And in Pooh Shiesty's case, that attention didn't take long to turn into real-world consequences. Before the fame fully settled in, legal issues had already started forming in the background. Situations that may have seemed isolated at first began stacking up, creating a pattern that authorities couldn't ignore. What might have started as individual incidents slowly turned into something much bigger once federal investigators began connecting the dots. And when federal agencies step in, the entire situation changes. It's no longer local. It's no longer temporary. It becomes something far more serious. That's exactly what happened here. Cases that might have played out differently at a lower level suddenly carried heavier weight. Allegations involving firearms, robbery, and violent encounters brought intense scrutiny. And instead of dealing with one single issue, Pooh Shiesty found himself facing a combination of charges that painted a much larger picture in the eyes of prosecutors. At that point, the stakes were no longer small. The possibility of spending decades behind bars became very real. And that's something a lot of people don't fully understand. Once the federal system gets involved, the margin for error disappears. Every move, every decision, every word can impact the outcome. Eventually, the situation led to a major turning point, a plea deal. Now, in cases like this, a plea deal isn't just about admitting guilt. It's a strategic decision. It's about reducing risk. Because when you're facing charges that could potentially lead to life in prison, securing a limited sentence can be seen as the only realistic option. And that's exactly the position he was in. By accepting that deal, several of the most serious charges were taken off the table. In exchange, he received a sentence that, while still significant, was far less than what could have happened if things went to trial. It was a move that likely saved him from a much harsher future. But at the same time, it came with conditions. And those conditions don't just disappear once you leave prison. Because here's what many people overlook: getting out doesn't always mean you're free. When Pooh Shiesty eventually stepped back into the outside world, the environment had changed. The music industry was still there, fans were still paying attention, and the opportunity to rebuild was real. But behind the scenes, there were still rules, restrictions, oversight, the kind that doesn't allow for mistakes. And this is where things start to get complicated again. Because while he was trying to reestablish himself publicly, there were signs that not everything was moving as smoothly as it appeared. Social media activity, public appearances, and moments that went viral started raising eyebrows. Not necessarily because they were illegal on their own, but because of the timing and the situation he was still in. When you're under federal supervision, even small actions can carry big consequences. Being in the wrong place at the wrong time or presenting the wrong image can trigger attention that you don't want. And in today's world, where everything is documented and shared instantly, staying low-key is harder than ever. At the same time, conversations started circulating online. Rumors, speculation, accusations. Some people questioned his past case. Others started discussing things that hadn't been brought up publicly before. And in a culture where reputation matters, especially in hip-hop, those kinds of narratives can spread quickly. Now combine all of that, the legal history, the supervision, the public visibility, and the online discussions, and you start to see how a situation can build without a single official announcement being made. It becomes a pressure system, slowly tightening over time. And that's exactly why what happened next feels so significant. Because when federal authorities decide to make a move, it's usually not based on one single moment. It's based on everything leading up to it. Every detail, every pattern, every connection. So the real question isn't just about what happened recently. It's about everything that led up to it. Because in situations like this, nothing exists in isolation. And sometimes the biggest events are the result of things people didn't pay attention to at the time. What happened next is where the situation takes a turn from complicated to serious. Because when you start hearing about federal agents moving in the early hours of the morning, that's not routine activity. That's a coordinated operation. And when that operation is connected, even loosely, to someone like Pooh Shiesty, people are going to start asking questions immediately. According to what's been circulating, agents showed up at a property in Tennessee right before sunrise. Not local police. Not a casual visit. This was a federal-level presence. The kind that comes prepared, organized, and very intentional about what they're doing. And when that many resources are involved, it usually means one thing: they're not guessing. They believe they already know something. Now here's where things get even more interesting: the property itself. The home that reportedly became the center of this situation is tied to the name Lontrell Williams, a name that doesn't just belong to the artist, but is also shared with his father. And that detail right there changes everything. Because now, this isn't just about one person anymore. It introduces another layer, another possible angle, and another reason why this situation might not be as straightforward as people think. Think about it from an investigative standpoint. When authorities focus on a specific address, they're not only looking at who lives there, they're looking at everything connected to it. Financial activity, visitors, communications, history. Every detail becomes part of a bigger picture. And when two individuals share the same name tied to that location, separating those details becomes even more complex. So now you have multiple possibilities. One possibility is that this situation directly involves Pooh Shiesty himself. If that's the case, then the questions become very direct. Was he where he was supposed to be? Was he following the conditions placed on him? And if not, what does that mean for his current status? Because under federal supervision, even something that might seem minor can quickly turn into a major issue. Another possibility, and this is where things get deeper, is that the focus wasn't entirely on him to begin with. It could be related to his father or something connected to that property that has nothing to do with music at all. And if that's the case, then what we're looking at might be a situation where proximity alone creates risk. Because in federal investigations, being connected to the environment is sometimes enough to bring someone into the spotlight, even if they're not the original target. And then there's a third angle that people aren't talking about enough: timing. Timing in situations like this is rarely random. Everything happens for a reason, and when events start lining up too closely, it raises eyebrows. Just days before all of this started circulating, there were already conversations happening online, discussions about past cases, questions about paperwork, speculation that began gaining traction across social platforms. Now, on the surface, that might not seem like a big deal. People talk online every day. But when someone is still under federal supervision, public statements can carry weight. What you say, how you say it, and when you say it can all be interpreted in ways that most people don't even realize. Because once something is posted, it doesn't just stay on social media. It becomes part of a record. It becomes something that can be reviewed, analyzed, and potentially used in ways that weren't originally intended. And that's where the pressure starts to build again. Imagine being in a position where you're trying to move forward, rebuild your career, reconnect with your audience. But at the same time, every move is being watched more closely than ever. That's not a normal environment. That's not freedom in the way most people understand it. That's a controlled space where one misstep can undo everything. And that brings us back to the presence of federal agents. Because they don't just show up without a reason. Whether it's tied to a violation, a new investigation, or something connected to someone else entirely, their involvement signals that something triggered action behind the scenes. Something moved this situation from observation to execution. But here's the part that really stands out: the silence. No immediate statements. No quick clarifications. No attempts to shut down the speculation right away. And in situations like this, silence can mean a lot of different things. Sometimes it means people are still trying to figure out what's happening. Other times, it means the situation is serious enough that speaking publicly could make things worse. Legal teams often advise staying quiet when details are still developing. Because once something is said publicly, it can't be taken back. It can only be interpreted, and sometimes misinterpreted. So choosing not to speak isn't always avoidance. Sometimes it's strategy. But from the outside looking in, that silence only adds to the tension. Fans start asking more questions. The internet starts connecting dots. Theories begin to spread. And before long, the narrative starts building itself, even without confirmed information. And that's exactly where things stand right now. A situation with multiple angles. A name that carries both influence and controversy. A location tied to more than one individual. And a level of federal involvement that suggests this is not something small. At this point, the biggest question isn't just what happened, it's who this is really about. Because depending on that answer, the entire direction of this story could change. Now, this is where everything comes together, and also where things become the most uncertain. Because at this point, the situation surrounding Pooh Shiesty isn't just about what happened. It's about what happens next. When you look at the full picture, one detail stands out more than anything else: timing. Not just the timing of the reported federal activity, but where he was in his life at that exact moment. He wasn't at the beginning of a sentence. He wasn't in the middle of a case. He was at the edge of being completely done with the system. That final stretch where everything matters the most. And that's what makes this situation feel so heavy. Because getting that close to full freedom after going through the federal system is not easy. It requires discipline, consistency, and staying within very strict boundaries. One wrong move, or even the appearance of a wrong move, can bring everything crashing back down. And that's not an exaggeration. That's how the system is designed. Now think about everything that had been building up around him. The public attention, the comeback momentum, the online conversations, the scrutiny that naturally comes with being in the spotlight again. All of those things combined create an environment where pressure is constant. And under that kind of pressure, every decision carries more weight. Then you add in the possibility of location issues. If he was required to be in a specific place under supervision, and for any reason he was somewhere else, that alone could create serious consequences. Not because it's a major crime on its own, but because it violates the terms that were already set. And when those terms are broken, the response can be immediate. But at the same time, there's still that other angle that hasn't gone away. The possibility that this situation isn't entirely about him. The shared name tied to the property continues to raise questions. Because if the focus of the investigation is connected to someone else in that household, then what we're seeing could be a situation where circumstances overlap in a way that pulls multiple people into the same spotlight. And in federal cases, that overlap can be enough to create serious complications, even for someone who wasn't the original target. And that's what makes this so difficult to read from the outside, because there are two very different narratives that could be playing out at the same time. One narrative says this is a direct issue, something tied to his own actions, his own decisions, and his current situation under supervision. If that turns out to be true, then the consequences could be immediate and significant. It could mean setbacks, legal challenges, and potentially going back into the system he was just about to leave behind. The other narrative says this is indirect, a situation where the focus is somewhere else, but proximity creates involvement. And if that's the case, then the outcome depends on how clearly those lines can be drawn. Because in complex investigations, being close to the situation can sometimes be enough to create temporary problems, even if they're later resolved. But regardless of which narrative is true, the impact is already being felt. The music industry is watching. Fans are watching. And the conversation has already started shifting. Instead of talking about new releases, people are talking about legal uncertainty. Instead of focusing on momentum, the focus has moved to risk. And that shift matters. Because in entertainment, perception can change just as fast as reality. One moment you're building a comeback. The next moment your name is attached to a situation that nobody fully understands yet. And until clear information comes out, that uncertainty becomes the story. Now, let's talk about something deeper, the pattern. Situations like this aren't new, especially when it comes to artists who have had prior legal issues. The transition from incarceration back into public life is one of the most difficult adjustments anyone can make. Not just because of the restrictions, but because of the expectations. People expect you to succeed, to stay out of trouble, to rebuild, all while you're still navigating a system that hasn't fully let you go yet. That's a difficult balance. On one side, there's the desire to return to normal life, to reconnect with your audience, to reclaim your place in the industry. On the other side, there are rules that limit how freely you can move, what you can do, and sometimes even how you can present yourself publicly. And when those two sides clash, that's when problems can start. Now add social media into that equation. In today's world, everything is documented. Every post, every video, every appearance, it all becomes part of public record. And for someone under supervision, that visibility can work against them just as easily as it works in their favor. Something meant to clear your name or tell your side of the story can end up creating more attention than intended. And attention, in this kind of situation, isn't always a good thing. Because the more visible you are, the easier it is for every move to be analyzed. Not just by fans, but by people whose job is to monitor patterns, behavior, and compliance. And once something catches their attention, it doesn't just disappear. It gets noted, reviewed, and sometimes acted upon. Which brings everything back to this moment. A situation that started with reports of federal activity has now turned into a much bigger question mark. A moment that could either pass with clarification or evolve into something much more serious depending on what information comes out next. And right now, that's the key, information. Until something official is confirmed, everything remains in that uncertain space between possibility and reality. But one thing is clear, this is not a small situation. The level of attention, the context surrounding it, and the timing all point to something that matters. So now, everything comes down to what happens next. Because in situations like this, the next move is the one that defines everything. If you made it this far, then you already know this situation is far from over. What's happening around Pooh Shiesty right now isn't just another headline. It's a developing story with real consequences, and the next update could change everything. Whether this turns out to be a direct issue, something connected to his environment, or something completely unexpected, one thing is clear: people are watching closely. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think the situation is really about Pooh Shiesty, or could there be something deeper going on behind the scenes? And how much do you think public exposure and social media played a role in bringing attention back to him? Drop your thoughts in the comments and let your voice be heard. Make sure you stay locked in, because the moment new details come out, you already know we're breaking it down. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and don't miss what happens next.